Do you feel like an imposter, lost in your own skin with the sense that you just do not fit in, tired of chasing a self that always feels out of reach? Then stop right now, because the truth is, you will never find yourself. And believe me, that is the most freeing thing you will hear today. We spend our whole lives on that exhausting hunt for a fixed identity, an absolute truth about who we are. But what if that search is the very trap? What if the secret to your soul, to your true essence, lies in giving up on finding yourself? In this video, we will tear away the veil from one of modern life's greatest illusions and hand you the key to a freedom few even dare to imagine. Drawing on the revolutionary ideas of James Hillman, we will show that the soul is not something to be found, but a mystery to be lived. Get ready to turn your mind inside out and discover that your greatest strength lies in accepting what you can never define. Stay until the end, because what you hear here will blow your mind and transform your inner journey forever. From an early age, we are put in an invisible race, one that promises a grand prize at the finish line, discovering who you are. Sounds beautiful, right? But the trouble begins when you realize you can run and the prize never arrives. Modern culture has turned self-discovery into a billion-dollar market of promises, gurus, coaches, and foolproof methods, as if there were a definitive version of you hidden somewhere secret, just waiting to be revealed. And with every new course, every new theory, every self-help book, the promise pulls you one step closer to that so-called true you. Yet Hillman, with his archetypal wisdom, throws a stone through that shining window. What if there is no fixed you to be found? What if that quest is actually a vicious cycle that only feeds frustration? After all, the more you try to fit into a mold, the more you see how far you are from any stable shape. It is like trying to catch the wind in your hands. What seems to take form before you dissolves the moment you grasp. Look at how many people live trapped in that cycle, always believing they need one more diploma, one more certification, one more transformative trip, one more 21-day meditation. And each time they achieve something, the emptiness returns almost immediately, because deep down the problem is not a lack of external achievements, but the illusory expectation of finding a finished self. It is as if we are all waiting for the arrival of a character that simply does not exist. This psychological prison of the fixed self is more common than you might think. Look around and you will see how many define their identity by their job, by their status, by social approval. And when those things change or disappear, they suffer an existential collapse, because everything was built on a rigid identity that cannot withstand life's natural flow. Hillman reminds us that the soul is not a statue, it is a river in constant movement. Now imagine the relief of realizing you no longer need to chase that idealized version of yourself, that your soul is already in continuous expression, even in your mistakes, your fears, your contradictions. It is liberating, is it not? You are not an engineering project seeking your perfect model. You are already a living organism full of nuances and possibilities, and here is where the deepest shift begins. Because if there is no fixed self to be found, then what exists? What in fact is that entity called the self that so many chase? And why does Hillman break with the traditional idea of a single center of identity? That is exactly what we will explore now. The greatest trap of self-discovery is imagining there is a final point, a fixed destiny, where the person will finally find themselves complete and whole. But Hillman invites us to see in a different way. He says the self is not a precious gem waiting to be uncovered at the bottom of a cave, but a vast field of images in motion, a stage where multiple inner characters coexist. Every emotion, every contradictory desire, every strange impulse that arises in us is not a flaw. It is a legitimate face of this psychic multiplicity. When someone understands this, something profound happens. Suddenly, the fear of being incoherent, of going through different phases in life, loses its power. There is no ideal self that must command everything. There is instead a rich soul full of internal stories, of roles that take turns as life seasons change. One day the warrior leads, another day the caretaker appears, then the sage, the lover, the artist, the rebel, all are legitimate parts of the same great inner spectacle. Think, for example, how many times you have changed tastes, dreams, and plans. In your 20s, you wanted one thing. In your 30s, something completely different. And by your 40s, you may not even recognize those old desires. That is not an identity failure. That is the soul expressing itself through its diverse images. Each phase of life is ruled by different characters bringing new potentials. That fluidity is healthy. It is alive. It is human. The problem arises when someone tries to suppress that multiplicity, when they believe they must choose one role and remain in it forever, as if there were a psychic contract forbidding change. That is where existential crises, anxiety, and that feeling of being off track are born. But what Hillman shows us is exactly the opposite. The soul loves movement, drama, and unexpected scenes in the script. This perspective frees you because suddenly, you no longer need to bear the burden of constant coherence. You can be artist and entrepreneur, mother and explorer, sensitive and brave all at once. The soul does not work with fixed labels, but with the richness of creative improvisation. And each new character that emerges carries unique lessons and new layers of experience. But here comes an even more unsettling question. If the soul is multiple, if there is no fixed self, then where does that overwhelming anguish come from that so many feel when trying to fit in? What lies behind this modern obsession with always improving, always optimizing, always seeking the ideal self? This is where we enter the silent tyranny of the perfect life project. Today there is a silent but brutal fever. The idea that life must be one great ongoing improvement project, almost like an app that is always updating to your new version. The pitch is seductive. The promise is that if you devote enough effort, take the right course, read the right books, and wake up at 5 with military-style discipline, you will finally become your best self. But Hillman regards this with deep suspicion. He knows the price that obsession demands. That unchecked self-improvement creates a vicious cycle. There is always something to adjust, something to improve, a new flaw to fix. In that process, the soul becomes an engineering project. And worse, a project that never ends. Because there will always be a new standard of perfection to attain. And the more someone chases that ideal, the more they feel empty for never reaching it. It is like running on a treadmill that never stops. How many people today are exhausted trying to perform in every area of life? They want successful careers, exemplary parenting, amazing partners, financial prosperity, flawless fitness, and spiritual elevation. But in trying to be everything at once, they end up emotionally drained, as if carrying a suitcase full of unreachable goals. They cannot relax anymore. Every rest is met with guilt. Every pleasure feels like a detour. Every imperfection reads as a failure. Hillman calls for a pause. He says the soul does not want to be perfected. It wants to be heard. And that changes everything, because instead of asking, "How can I be better?" one asks, "What does my soul want to express now?" It is not about abandoning responsibility or growth, but leaving the compulsive mode of constant correction. It is starting to listen to what pulses authentically, even if it does not match social standards. For example, sometimes the soul calls for retreat, but the perfect life project demands productivity. Sometimes it calls for art, but the ideal plan requires pragmatism. Sometimes it calls for a change of path, but the 5-year plan says to maintain stability. When someone learns to listen to those internal calls, they realize how much life was stifled in the name of an unreachable ideal. Of course, listening to the soul is not as simple as it sounds. The soul does not speak in the direct language of logical thought. It communicates in a very peculiar way. It is precisely through those strange languages, those subtle signals, that the soul whispers its true messages. And that is where we enter now. How does the soul actually speak? The soul is poetic, symbolic, and full of living images. When it wants to express itself, it does not send a neat email with numbered bullet points. It delivers absurd dreams, mysterious symptoms, unexpected desires, and curious repetitions. It uses metaphors to prod us and draw attention. How many times have you had a dream so bizarre you did not know how to interpret it, or felt a strange longing for something that seemed meaningless, or faced a physical symptom no one can properly explain? All of these often are images from the soul, creating a crack in automatic routine so their voice can be heard. They are not accidents. They are signals. Ignoring them may be why suffering continues. For instance, that sudden anxiety might be more than a mere physiological issue. It could be the soul hinting that part of your life is suffocating, or persistent insomnia might be the unconscious telling you there is something unresolved that needs brave attention. Those bouts of tears for no clear reason often are an overloaded soul finding a small space to pour out. The problem is modern life taught us to anesthetize those signals. Anxiety comes, and we immediately seek a sedative. Insomnia comes, and we pop a pill. Existential discomfort arises, and we reach for our phones to distract ourselves. Of course, in many cases, medical support is valid and needed, but the question remains, how often are we simply silencing the soul's messengers instead of listening to what they try to say? Hillman invites us to another kind of listening, symbolic, imaginal listening, where every symptom is seen as a living image, an incomplete narrative demanding development. Instead of asking, how do I remove this, we ask, what is this trying to show me? It is an invitation to delve into mystery and dialogue with what we normally push away. And when we dive into that realm of images and symptoms, another fundamental dimension emerges. Because these messages are not always comfortable. Often they bring that which we most want to avoid: suffering, discomfort, pain. But as we will see now, it is precisely in that uncomfortable terrain that the soul makes its greatest transformative moves. There is a dangerous illusion sold everywhere that suffering is always a mistake, something to eliminate as quickly as possible. But the soul does not see it that way. Hillman teaches that suffering is fertile ground for psychic growth. He calls it complication. The soul grows through complication, not through a linear, comfortable path, but through rich experiences that shake us, force us to rethink and plunge into depths we would otherwise avoid. When someone endures loss, failure, or disappointment, it does not happen by random cruelty. There is a summons to soul maturation in it. Think of someone betrayed by a partner who, instead of merely playing the victim, dives into deep questions about trust, boundaries, choices, and desires. That dive can reveal aspects of the soul lying dormant, waiting for crisis to emerge. No one consciously welcomes suffering, yet when it knocks, it can become one of the greatest opportunities for self-knowledge. Look at the great stories of triumph. They almost always carry moments of profound darkness, not because pain is good in itself, but because it forces the person to access parts of themselves that calm waters would never touch. Their character is forged, vision broadens, and the soul gains new shades. Suffering compels someone to abandon the childish idea that everything must work out perfectly. It teaches the art of surrender, resilience, and humility before life's mystery. Hillman would say the soul appreciates those twists and unexpected turns because they densify the psyche, making it richer and deeper. It is like steel that must endure intense heat to be forged. But there is an important point. Suffering for its own sake does not transform. Pain only becomes alchemy when viewed with awareness and a willingness to extract its symbolic meaning. It takes courage not to flee discomfort and wisdom not to drown in it. It is a delicate dance where pain becomes a demanding yet generous teacher. When someone learns to walk that ground, something magical happens. They see life need not be controlled like a rigid engineering plan. There is another way to live, much richer and more aligned with the soul's nature, and it is precisely that poetic way of existing we will explore now. There comes a time when a person finally understands. There is no point in trying to control everything like an engineering project. Life is not a spreadsheet to fill with goals, deadlines, and predictable outcomes. Hillman proposes something deeper: live poetically. That is, live with the lightness and beauty of someone who knows life is art, not formula, and like all art, it is imperfect, full of nuances, shadows, and unfinished edges, and that is why it is alive. When someone begins to live poetically, they allow their existence to have texture. They are no longer desperate to explain everything, justify every choice, or fit external expectations. They permit themselves to inhabit phases, experiment with inner movements, and honor their own cycles. Sometimes they seek silence, other times celebration, sometimes stability, other times adventure. And that is fine because that is how the soul breathes. Imagine a painter before a blank canvas. They do not have all the colors defined at the start. They experiment, layer strokes, correct lines, and test new forms. Some brush strokes are bold, others more restrained. The painting comes alive through its own process. That is how the soul weaves its biography, not as a fixed script, but as an open work gradually revealed. The problem is, most of us are trained to feel uneasy about the unfinished. Society demands ready-made answers. What do you do? Who are you? What is your 5-year plan? But living poetically is having the courage to say, I am not sure. I am discovering. It is an act of humility before the soul's vastness. It is accepting that despite all our desire for control, there will always be a greater mystery behind the scenes. Hillman insists that in this aesthetic of existence, true depth resides. The soul loves symbols, metaphors, and open stories. When someone lives that way, suffering does not vanish but gains meaning. Triumphs do not swell ego but inspire gratitude. Failures cease to be tragedies and become valuable chapters in one's own narrative. And precisely when someone lets go in that poetic flow, something surprising occurs. They realize that deep down there never was a fixed character to play. They were always the stage itself, where the soul's images perform. And that brings us to our final insight. Almost no one dares to say it, but the soul never wanted you to find a single character. The great truth is you have always been the stage where all the images of your psyche parade. You are not mother, professional, friend, lover, rebel, or sage. You are the space where they all exist, where each is born, grows, transforms, and when the time is right, exits the scene. That is living in harmony with the soul. When someone grasps they are the stage and not the actor, they gain a rare freedom. No more panic over absolute coherence. They can live in phases, embrace contradictions, and run experiments. They can be strong today and vulnerable tomorrow. Rational in one moment and emotional in the next. That dance of images is not chaos but vitality. It is the soul revealing its creative wealth. See it in practice. Some people change careers multiple times, some passionately love and then choose solitude. Some move countries, beliefs, and purposes throughout life. All of that can be legitimate as long as they are not trying to fit into one fixed mold. That multiplicity is not a sign of failure, but the soul's flexibility in exploring its many archetypal images. Hillman would say, real meaning resides in that fluidity. It is not about becoming someone, but about letting each aspect of the soul express itself at the right moment. There is no final version waiting to be reached. There is an eternal dance of possibilities, each bringing a new layer of depth and insight. And oddly enough, it is in that recognition of multiplicity that peace emerges. The anguish of needing to find oneself vanishes. The burden of having to be someone dissolves. What remains is the lightness of living in the present, honoring the characters that appear and respecting the mystery of what is yet to come. The stage judges no one in the spotlight. It simply sustains the living spectacle of life unfolding. Now tell me, how many times have you tried to fit in? How many times did you believe you needed to discover your ideal version to finally feel whole? Do you now see how that search only pulled you away from your own soul? You no longer need to carry that weight. Your soul is already alive. It pulses in every strange desire, every unexpected phase, and every contradiction you once felt you needed to fix. But what will you do with this truth going forward? Will you keep trying to fix yourself? Or will you finally embrace the dance of your own multiplicity? The choice is yours. If this resonated, if something inside you was moved in a new and deep way, subscribe to the channel now. Because here we go ever deeper. This is only the beginning of the journey. Your soul still has so much to reveal.